On November 21st, 2011, one of the most advanced military aircraft ever built met an unceremonious fate. Over the course of 3 days, transport trucks rolled out, carrying the wingless fuselages of 23 F-111 aircraft to their final resting place, the Swanbank landfill in Queensland, Australia. For an aircraft that revolutionized military aviation, this was hardly the farewell it deserved. The F-111 pioneered groundbreaking technologies, including turbofan engines with afterburners for massive bursts of thrust, terrain-following radar that allowed it to skim just above the ground at over 600 miles per hour, even in complete darkness, and variable geometry wings that adjusted mid-flight for maximum performance. But the F-111 story isn't just about innovation. It's about controversy, setbacks, and moments of sheer audacity. Why didn't it have ejection seats like other aircraft? Why did Australia go through 10 defense ministers just to receive its F-111s, only to bury them later? How did a two-seater jet end up carrying 3 people at one point? And how did the F-111 drop a bomb that helped end a war? So let's discuss. Let's start with its most unusual safety feature, the escape pod. Unlike most aircraft which rely on ejection seats, the F-111 had an entire ejection cockpit. Why? Because early tests with traditional ejection seats at 300 knots showed, well, let's just say they were less than ideal. Dummies thrown out into the slipstream flailed violently, their arms and legs snapping back uncontrollably. The F-111 solution? The entire cockpit would separate as a sealed capsule, keeping the crew safe during ejection. And in case you were wondering how such a heavy capsule slowed its descent with just a tiny parachute, don't worry. That small canopy was just for stability. A much larger chute deployed to ensure a safe landing. Want to hear from someone who actually used this system? I can talk about this because I survived an F-111 ejection. When you pull the handle, there's a quarter-second delay. In that time, all controls and electrical cables are severed, explosive charges fire, and the rocket engine ignites. That quarter of a second? It felt like an eternity. But honestly, it was a really great system. And that's just the start of what made the F-111 special. Its terrain-following radar was another game-changer. Pilots could simply dial in an altitude and the aircraft would automatically hug the landscape, day or night, rain or shine. You didn't feel it. You didn't see it. You just knew you were flying inches above the ground at over 600 miles per hour. Adrenaline? Through the roof. Then there were its swing wings. Fully extended, they generated maximum lift, allowing the F-111 to take off from short runways and carry heavy payloads. But in flight, they could sweep back for high-speed, supersonic performance. The best of both worlds. But here's the thing, this revolutionary aircraft didn't just happen. It was born out of a political and military nightmare. Flashback to May 1st, 1960, a U-2 spy plane flying at 60,000 feet was shot down over the Soviet Union. This put an immediate stop to the U.S. Air Force's plans to rely on high-altitude bombers like the B-47. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy needed a long-range interceptor to protect aircraft carriers from Soviet bombers. Enter Robert McNamara, the newly appointed Secretary of Defense, who decided both branches should share a single aircraft under the Tactical Fighter Experimental TFX program. McNamara's decision wasn't popular. The Air Force and Navy fought over their wildly different needs, but in 1962, General Dynamics won the contract. The Air Force got the F-111A. The Navy got the F-111B, a version with a shorter nose to fit on carrier elevators. Australia also wanted in, ordering its own F-111C to bolster regional deterrence. The UK signed up for the F-111K, but by the time the first prototypes were built in 1964, the program was already in trouble. In 1968, the F-111 saw its first real combat in Vietnam, and the results were disastrous. Of the first 6 sent, 3 vanished in less than a month. Engineers later traced the issue to a faulty hydraulic control valve. Then back home, more bad news. The U.S. Navy canceled its F-111B order after carrier trials exposed serious weight and performance problems. The British government followed suit, scrapping the F-111K due to rising costs and a depreciating pound. And in December 1969, a catastrophic structural failure caused an F-111 to lose a wing mid-flight, grounding the entire fleet. Australia, which had already poured millions into the program, had no choice but to wait. By the time the wing issues were fixed and deliveries resumed in 1973, the cost had tripled. But in the end, Australia got what it paid for, an aircraft that would remain the backbone of its strike force for nearly 40 years. And it wasn't just about combat. The F-111 performed some truly unexpected missions. In 1986, it flew a supersonic emergency mission to deliver a donor heart from Oklahoma to Connecticut on Valentine's Day, no less. But its most iconic trick? The dump and burn. Because its fuel dump nozzle was located between the engine exhausts, igniting dumped fuel created a spectacular fireball. Something crowds love to see at air shows and events like the Sydney Olympics. Unfortunately, fuel wasn't the only thing leaking from the F-111. A maintenance program to reseal its fuel tanks exposed workers to toxic chemicals for over 2 decades, leading to serious health consequences and a government-backed compensation program. Through it all, the F-111 adapted. It gained laser-guided bombing capability, reconnaissance equipment, and even an electronic warfare variant. But as newer, more efficient aircraft emerged, it became harder to justify the F-111's high maintenance costs. By the 1990s, precision-guided munitions allowed aircraft like the F-15E Strike Eagle to match the F-111's strike capability without the need for risky low-altitude missions. The U.S. retired its fleet in 1998. Australia held on for another 12 years, but in 2011, it was time to say goodbye. Some were preserved in museums, but the rest, 23 in total, were dismantled and buried in a landfill. The reason? Asbestos in their structure made recycling too expensive. It was an unceremonious end for an aircraft that redefined air combat. But for those who flew it, maintained it, or simply watched it light up the night sky, the F-111 remains unforgettable. And one more thing, kindly subscribe and like this video to stay connected with us.